Okay, so I just wanted to officially welcome everyone to today's webinar. Given the current social situation at the moment, it's obviously best that we do these things online, and we just wanted to make sure that this information was still available to everyone and accessible. If you have any questions after today's seminar finishes, please just let me know. We can always get back to you at any point in time. If you have questions, we can have a discussion over the phone or via email, whatever's more suitable to you. I'll just take a moment just to introduce myself for those of you who do not know who I am. My name's Elise Codrington. I'm a speech pathologist from Australia. I'm working with Boutique Education as their head educator, so I'm supervising the staff and doing the recruitment for them. The other aspect of my job is professional learning for their staff and on behalf of their company. Today's seminar falls into that aspect of my role. So the emotional regulation of younger students and younger children is where we're going to focus today. That doesn't mean that these ideas and resources are not applicable to the older students. It's just that they were designed and developed with that younger age bracket in mind. So when I say younger age bracket, I'm talking 3 years old to sort of 7, 8 years old. After that point in time, the social dynamics are a lot more complex, and there may be other things that you would need to integrate into your strategies as well as you go through working through those situations with those children. So this emotional regulation tool that we're going to talk about today is aimed at that age group. I spent in Australia the last 9 or so years working in schools, working with teachers in classrooms and with students in groups and one-on-one. The main focus of my role has always been training teachers to improve their teaching strategies and their knowledge base so that their teaching within a classroom is more efficient and more effective for that broad range of students that you always get within one classroom. So in Australia, the classroom size is usually around 20 children. And in the international schools, which is who Boutique Education generally work with, the majority of the time, it's around about that as well. The local schools over here do have a higher class group, and we as a company found that we're more, we're tying in more so with the international schools, and they sort of have a lot of teachers who are Australian, so they know a lot of these things already, or they have heard about them and want that input. So that's what today is coming into, as well as for parents who find that they might be spending more time with their children at the moment, more time under the one roof, and are just interested to have a few extra strategies and tools up their sleeve. These things can also be used in a one-on-one session with a student, or when you are working as a teacher with a small group or a one-on-one pull-out. So keep it in mind for all of those situations. And if you have any questions regarding any of that, please just, as I said, go into the chat box and you can either ask me that question privately or for everyone, and we'll get on to you as soon as we can. To give you a bit of a background around emotional regulation, it generally is referring to the process by which individuals influence their own emotions. So having said that, it's how they experience and also when they experience their feelings. And it can be automatic, but it can also be controlled. It can be conscious and unconscious, and it also affects their ability to influence their emotions at different points throughout the emotion producing process. Now, what does all that mean? Basically, we're going to be talking about both positive and negative emotions today. So it's not just when a child gets angry, and that's a big take home from today. It's building awareness around what you're feeling and why, and strategies that you can use or that you can assist the child using to help them feel either a different way or just be aware of the way that they are feeling at that point in time. It's one of those tools where the more that you use it, the stronger it gets and the better you are at controlling your emotions in different situations. So I'm going to take you through the resources that you were given that relate back to that. And then I'll screen share the slides for you, and then I'll have that screen share up for the majority of the session so that you can follow along. All of the information in the slides is in the documents that we sent you already. So you don't have to worry about missing information. Feel free to take as many notes as you want, but all the information is there. Let me just sort this out. So you should be able to see on your screen one of the handouts that you were sent. This is a document that I'll be referring back to. I don't want to go into it now or I'll just run on with it. But you should have received this in your email. You'll also receive a document that looks a bit like this one. The Boutique Education document is the info sheet that I was talking about. Everything I'm going to say today is within that. It's just a one-pager. They're just tips and tricks. And then any other information you'll find within the 2 articles that I'm referring to. So, yeah, sure thing, Molly. I'll get onto that in a tick for you. So there's the vocabulary document, which is some of the wording I'm going to use today and just descriptions exactly as it sounds. And then also this article written by Leah, who I'll talk about in a sec. And this is a really big take home. So I'm going to be referring back to this throughout the discussion today as well. Now, Molly has just asked how we can get the recording later. So I'll go through that at the end and how we can make it available to you. So today, we're going to be talking about emotional regulation. Now, as I just said before, emotional regulation encompasses the positive and the negative emotions. So please don't only associate this with getting angry, getting frustrated, having a blow up. It is very, very helpful in those situations, but they are not the only situations where it is effective and a useful tool. When we talk about emotional regulation, we're referring to 3 general areas. So building awareness for yourself when you're working with a student about the emotions that they're feeling and how they show and display those emotions. We're also talking about the awareness of the student or the child. So how they are feeling and how those emotions manifest within their child. So something to be aware of is when you're wanting to build awareness or emotional awareness within a child, try to stay objective and do it in question form. So when you're asking or talking to a child about how they're feeling, ask them questions about exactly that. So how are you feeling at the moment? Do you feel differently than you did before? Ask them about their internal reactions. You're looking a bit jumpy. Talk to them about things that are objective that you can see. Try not to label the emotion until you're certain that that is the way they're feeling, because mislabeling emotions for a child can then lead to more confusion later. So try and stay objective where possible. It's one of those things where you can always say to the child, I think you might be getting a bit frustrated because this happened, or because I'm seeing this behavior. In doing that, you're giving the child the option to then say, yes, that is how I'm feeling, or no, I'm not. If you just say you are frustrated, I need you to laugh, then you're not giving the child that opportunity to think about how they are actually feeling. And that's what you need them to do. That's the important process. For the child to be having that moment of self-reflection and thinking about, yep, this is how I'm feeling, and that's what that's called, is frustrated. Okay, noted. When you can, and when you feel confident labeling the emotions, as I said, do so in a way that is in the form of a question. So, oh, I think you might be feeling this way. Are you getting a bit hot? Do you feel a bit restless? Always ask it in a question, because that then gives the child, as I said, the opportunity to be part of that awareness building process, and not just being told how they're feeling. No one likes to be told how they're feeling. So try not to do it when you don't need to. Some children have a lot of trouble building their awareness, and in that case, then you can help them do that by saying, I think that you're getting upset, or I think that you're getting angry. I think that you're doing this, and give them the reasons why. Where you can relate that back to the child's behavior, things that they actually physically did, then that's going to mean more to the child than you just telling them. So if you can say something to them, for example, I think you're upset about this because when it happened, you started crying, or you were stomping your feet. If the child can relate it back to something physical that they did, a physical behavior, it's going to be a lot easier for them to create that connection than just to how they're feeling internally. The internally aspect of it is always a bit more tricky for the little kids especially. Keep in mind, I am referring to kids who are 3 to 8 years old. So we're wanting to be able to have strategies that would apply to both. Some of these conversations will be a lot easier with a 6-year-old, obviously, than a 3-year-old. So just make sure that you're targeting these conversations and the language you're using that's appropriate for that age group. When you're talking about then the tools that you're going to be using, these tools will change. They will change child to child. They will change within one child for the different situations they're in. They will also change just with time. So just because you've tried something that might be, for example, if your child that you're working with is really tired, they are coming across to you as really unmotivated to be participating in the activity that you're trying to set up, or they're just really unengaged in the thing that you're doing. If you try something with them and it works on Tuesday, you can't bank on the fact that it's going to work on Thursday. So remember that. And if it doesn't work on Tuesday, it may work on Thursday. So just because something doesn't work once or twice doesn't mean that that will never work for that child. So when you notice a strategy is working, run with it. At whatever point there comes where that strategy stops working, go back to the start and try everything again. Don't discount other strategies just because they haven't worked before. The child will have changed. The situation will no doubt be different because the child will be a different age and therefore have a different outlook socially. They'll also have different impacts coming in and affecting the way that they're thinking. So, as I said, go back and try everything again and see what sticks that time and then run with that thing. Being flexible with emotional regulation is going to be a really big help for anybody who's working with a child, but especially if you've got multiple children you're working with. So the main tool that we're going to be working with today is referred to as the zones of regulation. The zones of regulation is a specific tool that was developed. So it's developed by an OT mainly called Leah, and she has worked with the people behind social thinking. Now, a lot of you may have heard of social thinking before. It comes out of the States. It's been around for about 20 years now, and it's got a lot of good research behind it in regards to being a really well-founded framework for working with children within the social dynamics and the social difficulties that come up as children age. Michelle Garcia-Winner is the lady who founded social thinking. And so Michelle and Leah worked really closely together to pull the zones of regulation together and to create all these resources. For the people who have joined us who are working in schools, especially, this book is the book that you can purchase if you're interested in learning more or incorporating it into your curriculum in some capacity. It's available everywhere. If you just look it up, you'll find it. But what we're going to do today is talk about how we can use the zones of regulation tools and strategies within the context of more so that one-on-one or in a home environment for those students who are 3 years old to about 8. Just be aware that the zones of regulation resources are all copyrighted. So we're able to reproduce them for the means of education like today, but in no way is anybody allowed to reproduce them and sell them for their own profit or anything like that. So I need to make that really clear for everyone at this point in time, because of all the legality around those sorts of things, you don't want to be messing with that. So for education purposes, they're fine. To be working with students and incorporating the tools, fine. But putting them on like Teachers Pay Teachers or something like that, you will get in trouble for that. So please don't do it. The biggest take home from today are going to be that all of the zones that we're referring to are okay. Everybody feels all of the zones. Nobody has never been in the red zone. Nobody has never been in the blue zone. Everybody goes in all of the zones, and that is natural, and that is a normal reaction depending on the situation you're in. So there's no bad zone. I will say that a lot. So just remember that the article that I was referring to previously that Leah wrote, that one refers to the zones, and it's all about the fact that all of the zones are okay, and you should be talking about all of the zones and the pros and cons of that zone. So this handout is, is what we're going to be referring back to. This is the main resource from today. When I use this strategy in my own house, I have this up in multiple rooms. So you want to avoid only talking or referring to the zones in a situation where a child, for example, has a meltdown or is showing negative behaviours for that situation. You want to make sure that you are referring to it when positive behaviours are being displayed, or in a situation, for example, we always are referring to the blue zone when we're doing our nighttime bedtime routine, because one of the zones, one of the zones within that time frame is the blue zone that's appropriate, because you want the kids to be calming down and, as it says here, you know, being in a state of low alertness, they will inevitably be tired, being slow moving and getting into a zone where it's appropriate for them to be moving on to sleeping. So that's when the blue zone is really desired. So we talk about that. The different zones are referring to the different levels of alertness. So when Michelle Garcia-Winner talks about the zones and refers to the zones, and when Leah does, they talk about the level of emotional arousal. So the blue zone has a really low level of alertness, low level of emotional arousal, and then you're moving up the zones in regards to level of emotional arousal. So the green zone, I've already talked a bit about the blue zone, and you can see it there on the screen. The green zone refers to being calm, happy, focused. We talk about the green zone when you're in a classroom, when you're ready to be sitting down, listening to teacher, focused, learning. The green zone is the ideal zone. Having said that, some children you may have in your classrooms or you may have in your household who need a bit of extra, it might be physical input, they might have a squishy, they might be restless, they need a bit of extra input in order to focus. So some children may actually at times focus better in the yellow zone, and that's fine. The majority of children, when they're in the green zone, that is their prime learning time. You don't always want the children to stay within the green zone though. They have to get their energy out. You want them to be, you know, some of those things like excited, you need them to be a bit silly. Sometimes they need to get their emotions out. And so that yellow and green zone, kids will often scurry between the two quite quickly. And that's fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. When you're moving up to the red zone, that's when you might see down the bottom there, it's saying that you're losing control of your behaviors. When I talk about the zones, I always say that the yellow zone is like the biggest zone. The red zone is a reasonably small zone because there's a lot of movement from being calm, ready to learn, to being out of control. So I hear a lot of teachers saying to me things like, oh, they're just constantly in the red zone. And at that point in time, we have that conversation around, okay, well, what is the red zone? What does it actually entail? It's really intense feelings of anger or elation or rage. It's more likely that they spend a lot of time in the yellow zone than they would in the red zone. A child being in the red zone, there's a lot of energy that goes into that. So they're not going to stay in the red zone for an entire day. They will go in and out of the red zone potentially, but they will not maintain that level of emotional arousal for a full day. So just be aware when you're referring to the zone that, in my personal opinion, the yellow zone is a really big zone. So kids can be a bit frustrated, they can be really frustrated, but not yet out of control. So there is a spectrum within there as well, within the zone. When the children are moving from zone to zone, you'll see their behavior changing. What we want to talk about with the kids is, okay, if you know which zone you're in, then that means you have the power to do something about it. If you know that you're in the yellow zone, but at the moment we're in the classroom trying to do a literacy activity, so we want to be in the green zone at the moment. If the child has that awareness, then they then have the power to put some tools in place to move themselves back to the green zone. And that's what we're going to talk about today as well, is how to build those tools with a student and how you need to be flexible with which tools are used in which situation. The tools from going down the zones, for example, so the red to yellow or the yellow to green or the green to blue, will potentially be the same, or they will potentially be different to going up the zone. And that will depend on the child, and that will also depend on the situation in which they're in order to get to the desired zone. The desired zone will be different depending on the situation. The desired zone at a birthday party, that's solid yellow. You want them excited and having fun. They might need a few moments to come back into the green zone, but that's a really nice time for them to be getting their energy out and being a little bit silly and having a bit of fun and eating a bit of cake and all that. If they're in a classroom, as I said, doing a literacy or a numeracy activity, something like that, then the desired zone might be the green zone. If it's bedtime, the desired zone may be the blue zone. If a child is ill, they will potentially be in the blue zone, and you might want to try and get them out of the blue zone a few times during the day so that they can, you know, come and engage in an activity with you, and then they'll go back. Or they might stay in the blue zone all day, or they might, you know, so all of the zones have their purpose, and all of the zones may be a desired zone depending on the situation. So there's no good zone, and that's always the zone you're aiming for. The desired zone depends on the situation. So incorporating the zones is a stepping stone process. You can't just chuck the posters up and go, sweet, zones of regulation is in place, because the process of a child building their emotional awareness takes time, and understanding which strategies work and do not work for a particular student takes time, and also is very evolving. So if a child wants to be able to move, if you want a child to be able to move from zone to zone, then that requires putting that work in order to have the child be aware of how they're feeling, and also be able to understand which strategies might be appropriate at that time to move to another zone. There's also the awareness on top of that of which zone is appropriate for this situation. When you have a particular situation, if you're in a home and you have multiple children in that home, or you're in a classroom situation, you would obviously have multiple people in that classroom. One action by a student or one event can very easily lead to different students ending in different zones because they will respond differently to that event. So that's where it becomes really important that the child has the emotional awareness and they're not reliant solely on the teacher to tell them how they're feeling and tell them what to do about it and tell them where they need to go. So when you can build the awareness with the student, that's going to be a key to making it a strategy that you can use ongoing. As I said, some strategies are going to be more beneficial to some students than others. So just keep reviewing them. And some strategies to get a student from, for example, the red zone to the yellow zone will be appropriate for a home environment, but they will not be appropriate for a school environment. So when you are, and when we're talking about the strategies and you're thinking about them, if you need to make that differentiation between this is something you can do at home to go into the yellow zone if you want to or need to. This is something you can do at home to go into the green zone or the blue zone, but you can't do that at school. Having that discussion is really important because the discussion around which zones are appropriate and which zones are not for different environments is what's going to help the child understand that different social situations have different rules. So they may already know that the rules at school are different to the rules at home. And this can then quite easily fall into that category for them. So it may be something that you think might be a difficult discussion to have, but it's often quite easily understood by the students when they're having that discussion with you. So don't worry about that. They'll probably already know that the rules are different at home than they are at school, and therefore some of their strategies are different at home than they are at school. Also different if they're at soccer practice versus at home. So, you know, you can have that discussion if that seems to be a real trigger for the child you're working with as well. Sorry, I've just lost something. Here we go. So when you're introducing the zones of regulation strategy at home, how do you start? The biggest thing to talk about is, as I keep saying, all of the zones are okay. The easiest way to introduce it is just to start labeling as a question, where possible, when you're seeing your child in those different zones. And it's a simple comment. It's something like, if your child is, for example, my children, scooting up and down the hallway and not using the brakes and running straight into the wall. They find that hilarious and they rev each other up. So in that instance, they very much are in the yellow zone. So I would, and I have previously said something like, oh gosh, you're having a lot of fun, aren't you? You're definitely in the yellow zone at the moment. That's all it is. It's just building that, oh yeah, I am, because it prompts them to then look internally and go, oh yeah, I am. I'm like having a lot of fun. We're giggling a lot. We're going, like we're quite excited. We're using up a lot of energy. We're running. We're having a lot of fun. Yeah, this is yellow zone. Okay, cool. At the same time, you can use it as a prompt. So, okay, you're still in the green zone and that's fine. But what we want at the moment is for you to be getting into the blue zone. It's a bit of quiet time. It's a bit of rest time. What can we do to help you get into the blue zone today? So keep referring back to these zones and referring to them at times throughout the day just with little comments. That's how you would introduce it. So you could always start with it's like, I think you might be in the yellow zone at the moment. How are you feeling? Because if they are in the yellow zone, or if they are in the blue zone, or if they're in the red zone, they're not going to be up for a chat about their emotions, most likely. So you can always just say, oh, I think you might be here. Oh, okay. Well, we can talk about it later, or we might come back to that another time. And then when they are in the green zone, you might then refer back to that time. Because you've earmarked it with them, it's going to be easier for them to refer back to it. Do you remember when I said that you might be in the yellow zone? Yeah, what were you doing? Can you remember? Oh, okay. So how did you feel on the inside? Do you remember how you felt on the inside? Chances are they're not going to the first few times, but the more that you have that discussion and the more that you bring it up, the easier it will be for them to then refer back to how they were actually feeling, because what you're doing is you're prompting them to start building their awareness. And as I keep saying, that's the key. The child having the awareness is the key for you to do all of this. As I said previously, when you're introducing the zones, most definitely it's beneficial to have this poster up in multiple locations though. Do not only put it where they would, for example, be having timeout. Because what they'll do is they'll associate any discussion around the zone with them being in trouble. And therefore, it's a bad thing. Especially when you're introducing it with the younger kids, like the 3- and 4-year-olds. Most of them hate being in trouble. And they really don't like being in trouble. So any sort of discussion around the fact that they're in trouble is something that they want to avoid. My son doesn't tend to follow that rule. He doesn't tend to mind when he's in trouble. He thinks it's very funny. So he's not quite 3 yet though, so we haven't even ventured into this with him, but that's going to be something that will impact the types of strategies I'm going to have to use somehow, work out what to do with that. My daughter, on the other hand, hates being in trouble. If she's on her second warning and she knows the next time is time out, she will do anything to avoid going to time out. Having this poster there helps facilitate and just also remind me that that's something to have a discussion about while they're sitting there once they have calmed down. We also have it up in their bedrooms. And another good spot is somewhere that's like a communal space, like a playroom or a lounge room or something like that. Have it up on the kitchen fridge, because what it will hopefully do is also remind you to be using the strategies and talking about it at different points throughout the day, but it will also hopefully avoid that direct association with, whenever we talk about zones of regulation, it's because I've done a bad thing. Whenever I talk about the red zone, being in the red zone is bad. And as I keep saying, all of the zones are good. The human body requires all of those zones to process things socially, and all of those zones have a role. So don't discount or label any of the zones bad. The thing that is the negative is the behavior that may come from the lack of control within a zone. So for example, a lot of the behavior that we see as undesired behavior in any social situation generally will come in the yellow, the red, or the blue zone. And that's because the level of emotional alertness or emotional arousal is not steady. So when you're in a good space for learning, you're generally more clear-headed, you're generally calm. So if something happens, you might not respond to it as ferociously as you may if you're in the yellow zone. So something that happens if you're in the green zone may not impact you as much. Then if you're in the yellow zone, it may push you over the edge into the red zone, or it may make you very sad and may push you down, straight down to the blue zone, sorry. So you can skip zones. Generally, the zone that would be skipped is the green zone, because you might go from being really silly because you are still emotionally aroused, that level of alertness, that level of excitement is quite high. And then a child says to another child, you did that, therefore you're not my best friend. That we get a lot. And that really has a big impact on the other child. So they just go straight down either to the blue zone and become very sad and withdrawn and take themselves away, or it might push them up to the red zone. And in those situations, you would have to work differently with that child in order to bring them into either back to the yellow zone and then to the green zone, or just back to the yellow zone, depending on what's appropriate at that point in time. Sometimes moving into the blue zone and coming back is beneficial because they need the quiet. That can sometimes be a tool, is trying to get them into that calm state, to get them into the blue zone for a bit where they can have a rest and have some quiet time. And then they can come back into the green zone to discuss what happened or to rejoin the classroom. So there's a few different ways to work with the zones. When you're introducing tools with a student, always have options for them to move from one to the other. There are exercises in this book that work on exactly that, working on which strategies are beneficial for your child. And as I said, child to child, they'll change. So going through some of those exercises can be really beneficial to be understanding what the child requires at that point in time. And as I said, review them constantly. So for example, going from the red zone, to the yellow zone may require one child, for example, to take some deep breaths. May require another child to sit at a window and watch, cars passing by. Or it may be that they have a physical toy or game, or they might want to be doing colouring in, and that's their activity when they feel as though they're either moving from the yellow to the red, or when they are in the red, moving back to the yellow to get them down back to green might be your aim. So as I said earlier, it is a stepping stone process in regards to how you introduce the zones of regulation, but also how you move a child from zone to zone. I'm so sorry, my daughter's escaped. So when you're in the process of talking with a student about the actual strategies they might use, you can have, as I said, school and home-based strategies. The other thing you can do is talk to the child about coming up with their own strategies, especially when they maybe aren't 3, but when they're 6, 7, 8, they will probably have a memory of a time when they've felt this way, and they may have already found a strategy that works for them. So have that discussion first before you try and suggest strategies. because that might give you a clue around other things that might be beneficial for them. So always include them in that strategy tool building exercise where possible. Having said that, even with my 3-year-old, I still got her to sort of try and come up with something. I'd give her options and she would choose one of those and try it. So try not to dictate the strategies because they will be different. Just try and make sure that whatever the strategies that you land on, or the 2 or 3 strategies that you land on are, that they are appropriate either specifically for the home or school environment, or they might be appropriate for both. And then you have that within your discussion. I've only got a few more minutes and then I'm just going to open it up for questions. So if anyone has any questions, as I said, just put them into the chat box, and I'll also stop the recording in a second as well. Within this article by Leah, so as I said, Leah is the lady who designed the zones of regulation and came up with the whole concept. And then the people and Michelle at Social Thinking came on board and helped her finalize all of it. She talks about using specific vocabulary when you're talking and when you're referring to the zones of regulation. And so what I've done is I've pulled those vocab and those bits of terminology, and we've put them together into this other handout that you have. So it goes through the actual zones as well, but you'll see on your handout that they also talk about the idea of little, medium, and big problems. So even if it's a child's experience of someone else's behaviour, they'll see that as a problem for them or targeted at them. So especially those younger kids when they are 3, 4, 5, 6, they're very, for lack of a better term, self-centered in the way that they look at the world most often. So things that occur will be happening to them. When you ask a 3 or 4-year-old what happened, they'll say, so-and-so did this. Not necessarily taking a step back and looking at the actual situation and how it unfolded. They'll talk about the specific behavior that a person or a friend or a peer did that impacted how they felt. And that is the thing that they will focus on. So having that discussion first around, okay, so is this a little, a medium, or a big problem, can sometimes start to help put it in that perspective for them around, okay, is this something that warrants this reaction? Sometimes just that process and the child practicing that process and going through that process regularly, assisted by an adult and then hopefully by themselves down the track, can help regulate their movement through the zones. So they may not go to the yellow or to the red zone as quickly in that regard. So have a look and have a think about how you may discuss that with students as well. Try and link it back to how they're feeling and their reaction to the behaviour that they feel as though was put on them. When they have a problem that's a little problem, they may see it as a big problem. And so having that discussion around, okay, what constitutes a big problem? What constitutes a little or a medium problem can be something that they may not have considered before because they don't have that awareness of their feelings yet. It also talks about triggers and talking about the toolbox of strategies. So when you're talking about the trigger, that might not necessarily be a conversation you'd have with a student, depending on their age, depending on the student, but it may be a teacher-to-teacher discussion, or a parent-to-teacher discussion, or a parent-to-parent discussion around a specific trigger for a specific response, and then how you might want to mediate that. So when you've got something that you know 9 out of 10 times pushes the child either out of the appropriate zone into an inappropriate or undesired zone, then at that point there might be a really good reason to them implementing some strategies for that child whenever that thing happens. The trigger, I've had a child I was working with previously where the trigger was the teacher getting their hair cut. Every time the classroom teacher got her hair cut, if it was above her shoulders, that kid just could not focus for 2 days straight. Now, that sounds like a very minor change in a child's life. I get that. But a lot of children, when they have difficulties in the social arena, something small like that isn't necessarily something that was ever designed to impact the child, but it's something that they focus on and then they get caught in that loop. So that's a trigger for that child. Once that trigger was identified, you can then start working around, you know, building the child up to, oh, my hair, you know, when it gets down to here, I'll usually cut it. And sometimes when the person cuts it, it goes above time. So that might be a conversation you never thought you'd have to have. But if you can identify the triggers for behaviors, then it's going to mean that your strategies are going to be a lot more effective and they're going to work a lot quicker because they will be targeted specifically for that student in that specific situation. I would very much, I would very much urge everyone to read this article written by Leah because it gives you a really good understanding around why all the zones are required and also how to talk about them. So please do that because it's a really good article. Now I want to open it up for questions because I know that we're at 11 at the moment and I don't want to keep you for longer than we said we would. I know everyone's got a lot on at the moment, so we really appreciate everyone's time, taking the time out of their day to come and listen. I'm going to stop the recording and then here we go.